Cold War. The Cold War, a comprehensive analysis. Historical origins and causes. Post World War II power vacuum. Collapse of European great powers 1945. Emergence of US and USSR as superpowers. Ideological competition. Capitalism versus communism. Power vacuum in Europe and Asia. Fundamental causes. Ideological conflict. Liberal democracy versus Marxist Leninism. Power rivalry. Traditional great power competition. Security dilemma. Mutual fear and suspicion. Historical grievances. Western intervention in Russian Civil War. Key early conflicts. Greek Civil War 1946 to 49. Turkish Straits Crisis 1946. Iran Crisis 1946. German Question, Division and Occupation. Phases and chronological development. First Cold War 1947 to 62. 1947 Truman Doctrine, Marshall Plan. 48 to 49 Berlin Blockade and Airlift. 49 NATO established Soviet atomic test. 1953 to 53 Korean War. 1955 Warsaw Pact formed. 1956 Hungarian uprising, Suez Crisis. 1961 Berlin Wall's construction. 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. Detent. 1963 to 79. 1963 Hotline established, Limited Test Ban Treaty. 1996 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. 1969 to 72 SALT I negotiations. 1972 Nixon's Moscow visit. ABM Treaty. 1975 Helsinki Accords. 1979 SALT II signed, never ratified. Second Cold War. 1979 to 1985. 1979 Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. 1980 US boycott of Moscow Olympics. 1981 Reagan administration's hardline stance. 1983 Able Archer incident, SDI announcement. Endgame 1985 to 91. 1985 Gorbachev comes to power. 1986 Reykjavik Summit. 1987 INF Treaty. 1989 Fall of Berlin Wall, Eastern European revolutions. 1991 Soviet Union dissolved. Key features and characteristics. Bipolar world order. Two superpower dominance. Spheres of influence division. Alliance systems. NATO versus Warsaw Pact. Global ideological competition. Nuclear dimension. Arms race and deterrence strategy. Mutually assured destruction. Doctrine. Nuclear non-proliferation efforts. Crisis management mechanisms. Proxy wars. Korean War 1950 to 53. Vietnam War 1955 to 75. Afghan War 1979 to 89. Angolan Civil War 1975 to 2002. Nicaraguan's evolution 1970 to 1990. Ideological competition. Economic systems competition. Cultural and propaganda warfare. Space race achievements. Development model rivalry. Major crises and flashpoints. European theatre. Berlin blockade 1948 to 49. Berlin Wall 1961. Czechoslovak crisis 1968. Polish crisis 1980 to 81. Asian conflicts. Korean War 50 to 53. Taiwan Straits crisis 1954 to 58. Vietnam War 1955 to 75. Sino-Soviet border conflict 1969. Caribbean and Latin America. Cuban Missile Crisis 1962. Bay of Pigs 1961. Chilean coup 1973. Nicaraguan Revolution. Middle East and Africa. Suez Crisis 1956. Yom Kippur War 1973. Angolan Civil War. Ethiopian Somali Conflict 1977 to 78. Alliances and military structure. Western Bloc. NATO 1949. North Atlantic Treaty Organization (SEATO) 1954, Southeast Treaty Organization (CENTO) 1955, Central Treaty Organization (UNJUS) 1951, Australia, New Zealand, United States. Eastern Bloc, Warsaw Pact 1955, Mutual Defense Organization Comecon 1949, Economic Cooperation, Brezhnev Doctrine, Limited Sovereignty Principle, Non-Aligned Movement, Bandung Conference 1955, Belgrade Summit 1961, Third World Leadership, Neutral Stance Advocacy. Economic dimensions: Western Economic System, Marshall Plan 1948 to 52, OECD establishment, Bretton Woods system, global capitalism expansion. Eastern Economic System, Comecon integration, 5-year plans, command economy model, resource allocation inefficiencies, economic warfare, technology embargoes, COCOM, grain embargoes, energy politics, development aid competition, arms race and military developments, nuclear arms race, Soviet atomic bomb 1949, 1952 US hydrogen bomb, 1953 Soviet hydrogen bomb, 1957 1957 ICBM development, 1960s multiple warhead systems, 1970s to 80s arms control negotiations, conventional forces, massive standing armies, advanced weapons systems, global force projection, military aid to allies, naval competition, carrier battle groups, nuclear submarines, naval base networks, sea lane control, space race, 1957 Sputnik launch, 1961 Gagarin's space flight, 1969 Apollo moon landing, 1970 space stations, 1980s SDI program. 8 cultural and ideological aspect: propaganda warfare, Voice of America versus Radio Moscow, cultural exchange programs, Olympic boycotts, film and literature as weapons, lifestyle competition, consumer society versus collective welfare, freedom versus equality rhetoric, technological innovation race, standard of living comparisons, psychological dimension, fear and suspicion culture, civil defense preparations, spy fiction popularity, nuclear anxiety, third world and decolonization, liberation movements, African independence struggles, Asian nationalist movement, Latin American revolution, Middle East nationalist regimes, superpower intervention, military aid programs, economic development assistance, political influence operations, regime change operations, non-aligned movement, non-aligned position, Bandung Conference principles, neutrality maintenance attempts, economic development focus, UN voting blocs, end of the Cold War, internal Soviet factors, economic stagnation, political corruption, nationalist movements, Gorbachev's reforms, glasnost openness, perestroika restructuring, new thinking and foreign policy, external pressures, US military buildup, SDA technological challenge, Afghan war drain, Eastern European unrest, key events 1989 to 81, 91, 1989 fall of Berlin Wall, 1990 German reunification, 1991 Gulf War, Soviet coup attempt, and December 1991 Soviet Union dissolution. Legacy and impact. Global power structure, US unipolar movement, Russia's diminished status, China's rising power, European integration acceleration, regional consequences, German reunification, Yugoslav wars, African state collapses, Middle East power realignments, nuclear legacy, nuclear proliferation concern, nuclear proliferation concerns, arms reduction treaties, missile defense debates, terrorism and WMD fears. Economic impacts, globalization acceleration, market economy Trump, development model consensus, economic inequality increases, cultural legacy, democratic wave, human rights emphasis, Western cultural dominance, historical memory divisions, historiographical interpretations, traditional views, US responsibility emphasis, Soviet aggression focus, good versus evil narrative, containment policy justification. Revisionist approaches, US economic imperialism, Soviet security concerns, mutual responsibility, missile missed opportunities emphasis, post revisionist synthesis, complex interaction understanding, structural factors consideration, multiple causality recognition, archival evidence utilization. The Cold War represents a defining period of 20th century history whose legacy continues to shape contemporary international relations, military strategy, and global political alignments. Its comprehensive study remains essential for understanding current world affairs and future global challenges. That's it for this topic.